So Fast X, or Fast 10, technically the 11th movie in the Fast and Furious franchise, is now out. I'm a big fan of this franchise, so of course I've already been to see it, so here's my quick 3-minute review of the movie, starting out with the positives. So the first big positive about this movie is that it dials down a lot on the crazy. It's by no means grounded, but it's not cars in space anymore. It feels a lot less insane than what a lot of the previous movies have been. It revisits a lot of the events of the previous movies, meaning that what's happened before actually is important to the plot. And I think the best instance of this is the fact that it goes back to street racing. This franchise began as a street racing franchise, and over the years has kind of become a bit more of like a wacky spy action franchise, which is definitely far from what it started out as. But here in this movie we kind of begin to revisit some of the franchise's roots. I found this to be a bit of a refreshing change of pace, and even though it doesn't do it too much, it's effective where it does. It kind of starts to remind us of why we grew to love this franchise in the first place. This is also probably the Fast and Furious movie with the biggest stakes. It feels like the Avengers Infinity War of the Fast and Furious movies, with its massive scale and all its tiebacks to the previous movies. Lastly, Jason Momoa is awesome as the villain, and probably one of the best villains that this franchise has ever had. He brings so much life and personality and energy to the character. He feels like he's more than just this one-time forgettable villain, which most of the franchise's villains have been up to this point. So I think the biggest negative on this film, the biggest thing that hurts it, is just how much it's trying to do. Because it is telling this big, massive story, it splits the family up, and so that everyone's going off in all these different locations and everyone's doing something different. This kind of makes it a bit harder to keep up with because it demands a lot more concentration than we're used to from these movies. It also just then starts to leave some plot lines feeling a little bit underdeveloped. It reminded me a lot of the new season of Stranger Things with the way that it splits the characters up and the way it tells its story. Now don't get me wrong, I love the new season of Stranger Things, but I think it worked a lot better for that than it does for this. And going back to what I said about it revisiting other movies, whilst I do think that that was a positive for it, I do think in some places it kind of does it a little bit too much. At times I wasn't understanding what was going on because it was tying back to an event that maybe I'd forgotten about from one of the previous movies, and that works as a bit of an issue. I do definitely think before watching this movie you should definitely revisit some of the previous films, rewatch some of them, just kind of refresh your memory a bit and try and remember what exactly happened. And lastly, the film ends on a massive cliffhanger. Normally that wouldn't be a bad thing. Cliffhangers can be awesome, but the way that the cliffhanger happens, it just kind of leaves the story feeling incomplete. You kind of need to wrap up the story that you're telling before you start thinking about, okay, let's leave it on a cliffhanger. That is something that's definitely going to anger a lot of people. So overall, I do think this was a fun ride with the family, with some epic stakes and a great new villain. But it does have a lot of problems that's going to irritate a lot of people. If you're a big fan of this franchise, definitely go out and see it. If you're more of a casual fan, maybe rewatch some of the previous movies, and then you can probably wait for this one to come to streaming.